The birth of a child is often the most important experience in one's life. It has been shown to change people and help shift one's perspective from focusing on the self to the other. Parents will go out of their way to protect their children and seemingly go to great lengths to sacrifice for them. But what happens when that new life feels more like a burden, and when the parent is not ready or willing to shift the focus from the self to the other? That very question is one brought up in the case Suzuka Hatakeyama, who took the life of her 9-year-old daughter and later the life of her daughter's 7-year-old friend. This is the story of Suzuka Hatakeyama and the case of the river murders. In Japan, children have, for the most part, lived a fairly protected life when compared to their Western contemporaries. Family, schools, and even communities often come together to look after their own in various ways, and children usually have little to fear when growing up. But in recent years, a string of child murders in the country has left Japan itself reeling, shaking the very core of a society that regards its children as its most precious commodity, something to be protected at all costs. This relative security now seemingly shattered from the inside out. And thus brings us to the case of Suzuka Hatakeyama, whose 9-year-old daughter went missing on April 9th of 2006. When 9-year-old Yaka went missing, Suzuka did what most parents would in the same situation. She called out for help in locating her daughter. A search was initiated, and a very public search effort was started. The case made the papers and garnered national attention, but that attention would eventually turn towards Suzuka, but not for the reason you might suspect. During the initial search, Suzuka portrayed herself as to be expected. She played the grieving mother. She called out to the public for help in tracking down the person responsible for the disappearance of her daughter, before her body was eventually found washed up on the bank of a stream near their home the day after she went missing. An investigation was quickly launched, and an autopsy concluded that the girl had accidentally fallen into the stream from a nearby bridge and drowned. But this was not enough for Suzuka, who insisted that it could not have been an accident, as she told police that her daughter never played down by the bridge overlooking the stream where her body was found. Suzuka also noted that it was far too cold for her daughter to even be in the area, and cited the lingering snow and the freezing water that would have surely kept her young daughter away from both the bridge and the stream. Suzuka seemed like a mother wanting answers, and it's hard not to side with her in this respect, especially if she might be correct, and if a child killer was on the loose. Suzuka would even publicly attack the police handling the investigation, going as far as to call them incompetent in the process. She would go as far as launching her own personal investigation into the death of her daughter, interviewing and almost harassing neighbors in the town, trying to track down any lead that she could. On the surface, this really did seem like a mother on a mission, the sort of story films and books are written about: a determined mother finding her child's killer when the police could not. But the police would once again open the case back up just over a month later, but not because of Suzuka's determination or her own investigation. Rather, because another child would go missing. This time, a 7-year-old boy only 2 doors down from the Suzuka residence and a close friend of her daughter Ayaka. The boy's body later being found on the bank of a river, much like her daughter. Suzuka would immediately become the prime suspect in the case as the media once again descended on her. But this time, her neighbors began turning against her, as she had seemingly rubbed them the wrong way in the past and during her own investigation. Many of them noted that Suzuka was a strange woman in general, isolated from the world and others, and noting that she seemingly hated those around her and in her community. Suzuka would eventually be arrested for the murder of the 7-year-old boy, later telling investigators that she strangled him to death and dumped his body so that her dead daughter would have someone to play with in the afterlife. But speaking through a lawyer, she would later add that she had also killed the boy as a way to force the police to reopen the case on her dead daughter. Suzuka was charged with the murder of the boy, but initially, the accidental drowning death of her daughter remained unchanged. People even going as far as to suspect that Ayaka had committed suicide because her mother was now seen as having neglected her, something those in the community noted with the media. But at her trial, Suzuka would face murder counts for both children, the prosecution suggesting that Suzuka had killed both children, her daughter, by pushing her off the bridge on that cold April day, and her 7-year-old friend a month later in a fit of rage. Suzuka's defense team would argue that she never intended to kill her daughter, and that she simply brushed Ayaka away while she was sitting on the edge of the bridge as she was trying to hold on to her, this leading to her fall and the eventual drowning. The defense was forced to take this position after Suzuka had confessed to investigators that she did, in fact, kill her daughter. The prosecution would also focus on the death of the 7-year-old boy, saying that Suzuka had killed him via strangulation with a cord inside her own home after inviting him in to play. They noted that Suzuka had intended to abduct the boy as a way to divert attention away from the death of her own daughter, but ended up killing the child in a fit of rage when she saw him happily playing. For their part, Suzuka's defense team would only suggest that the boy's murder was not premeditated, and that Suzuka was in a diminished state of mind when said attack took place, later driving the boy's body and dumping it on the bank of a river where it would later be found. The death penalty was sought in the case against Suzuka for both murders, but she would eventually be sentenced only to life in prison. Sometime later, the court would uphold said conviction, rejecting appeals by both prosecutors and defense. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty, while the defense was trying to set a definite term instead of life. The death of 2 innocent children is a tragic one, and one we may never get definitive answers to in terms of motive. Was Suzuka simply an angry mother, more focused on herself than on her child? Was she a victim of intense undiagnosed mental problems? Or, as some have suggested, did she commit the act as some form of retaliation for everything that Japanese society had done to her? She was a lonely single parent, seemingly ostracized by her community and later vilified by the media, leading her to snap. Perhaps one day we might find out and get those answers, as Suzuka Hatakeyama has a very long time to sit, think, and focus on her actions, as she is now confined to prison for the rest of her natural life. A life two young children will never get the chance to experience. Thank you so much for watching and joining us for this episode of Case Files. If you like the content and want to see more, we have tons of videos on our channel of other cases, some of which you can see during the end card of this video. If you want to support us, be sure to simply like, comment, and subscribe, and be sure to hit that notification bell to get informed when new videos release. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you again real soon for another episode of Case Files.